We're going to get practical now. Okay, we've done the macro. You've heard it from the government level. You've heard it from Ukraine, what's happening there. We need to talk about, well, what is it that churches need to do in this context right now? And I'm going to bring in some friends. I think we're going to start with Kat, and then we're going to hear from Rachel. Actually, why don't we bring both of them in at the same time, because they're good friends with each other as well, and they're wearing yellow and blue, and so am I. We're the Ukraine team today. Let's start with you, Rachel. You have been hosting refugees and unaccompanied asylum-seeking children in your family home for quite a long time now. Is it 10 years? How long have you been doing this?
Well, we've had young refugees, 17 in all, for the past 5.5 years, and others before that as well. Yeah.
It's amazing. So you've done this for the long haul. At the moment, the only way that we, the church, can be helping refugees is through helping hosts like you. And a long time ago, I used to run a fostering and adoption charity, and we said it takes a whole church to raise a child. There was a way that I, as a foster carer, you as a foster carer, could benefit from being supported from the wider church. And that's the only way, really, we can be active at the moment in helping refugees. So, as someone who has hosted refugees and unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, what is it that churches could do to support those that are hosting, whether that's in the church or outside of the church? What could we be doing?
Okay, I would say primarily there's two things. There's prayer and there's care. And just to unpack that a little bit, prayer, don't need to know the details, don't need to know the stories. Let's respect confidentiality and dignity of people we care for. But I love it when someone comes up to me and says, "Nah, I just want to spell their first name." They pop it in their phone, and I know they're going to be praying, for one of the young people we're caring for. And I just love that. And I think also for the hosts, it's quite common, I think, for everyone to almost take on some of the trauma, actually, some of the sadness and pain, because we hear the stories, we see the tears, we're up at night when people are feeling very sad. And it has, I think psychiatrists have said, that does actually get transferred. And so, although it feels dreadful to talk about one's own pain in the face of such sort of overwhelming pain of people that we see, I think prayer for the hosts and care for them. I can talk a bit about practical care if you like, or I can come back to that in a minute.
No, let's stay on that for a minute. So,
Okay.
Within a church, you might want to find out, well, who has already come forward. Who has already offered themselves as a host within your church. You might encourage more people to come forward as hosts, but we build in the backup system to care for the carers. That seems really important. I've seen that again in fostering. When churches have a culture of hospitality, suddenly it's not just one foster family, but 10 foster families in that church, and the rest of the church wrapping around as a team to care for them. Let's talk practically. What could that look like? Imagine that your church had 1 or 2 or 5 host families caring for refugees. What are some of the things that might help someone who's caring?
I think the things that really sort of speak to me most and support us the most is those gestures of care. Whether it's, the lady who, when we had 2 new girls arrive in the midst of all the busyness, she just arrived at my door with 2 bouquets, one for each of these young refugees, and she didn't want to come in, she didn't want to meet them. She just said, "Oh, this is for them," and that was so touching. There's another older lady who will regularly just put a chocolate cake on our doorstep, and that's a wonderful thing. Practical care, perhaps listening before doing is always a good tip. And I think being able to ask that question, how are you doing? Or what do the tough days look like? And enabling everyone to be a bit honest about it as well. And then perhaps popping in some care there. I think it's a surprise for some people that actually caring for refugees in our homes, most of us find quite isolating. Because we don't do other things that other people do. And although it's very busy and we're around people the whole time, there can also be a bit of isolation there as well, bit of a paradox, but maybe addressing that in different ways. So all sorts of practical help practical care
It's really
is.
helpful, Rachel. I remember when we had a new baby, a foster baby come into our house, our church decided to include us on the new baby meal rota. Even though we hadn't given birth to this child, they recognized that juggling life was difficult. So again, it might be an offer that the church says, look, you're going to have enough on your plate. Could members of the congregation come alongside you, provide they call it a meal train, I think, in America. That sounds pretty cool. But that could be another way. So again, I think the main thing is talking to the hosts. You might want to, if you've got hosts in your church, gather them together before anyone arrives and talk through in advance what are some of the things they might find helpful, how can that work. Now, the next stage out from that, of course, we've got to look after Christians that are hosting in their home. But in our towns and villages and cities, there'll be other hosts. And could the church include them in their care and support? What could we do kind of collectively for that group? Kat, you run Baby Basics. We've been working together for, it feels like forever, but it's only been 18 months. We've been working with Afghan refugees, and now we're working with Ukrainian refugees. First of all, tell us what Baby Basics does. I know we've got a campaign on at the moment, and then we'll talk about some of the ways that churches can wrap around hosts that are not in their church.
Yeah, so Baby Basics is the largest network of baby banks in the UK. So think of Trussell Trust and Food Bank, but we're Baby Basics and baby banks. So we support vulnerable families with all the essentials they need for life with children from pre-birth, so pregnant mums up to 5 years old. And we're working with Sanctuary Foundation in trying to ensure that host families have got the support that they need in terms of making sure that their houses and their homes and their communities are ready to welcome young children.
Brilliant. And there are some really important guidelines that you've developed over the years. They're based on kind of government best practice. Tell us about some of the things that hosts need to think about in their houses and that Baby Basics have been providing.
So I think the first thing to kind of consider, and I think as churches, is to kind of maybe bring together, like we've already said, all those people in your community, in your church who are thinking of hosting, because some of this you'll be able to do together. So it's thinking about what ages of children and makeup of family are you going to be able to accommodate within those homes. Have you got a pond in your garden and therefore that needs covering before you've got any under fives going near it? Things like really practical things about the actual makeup of your home. Also, have you got all the supplies that you need? Have you got beds? Have you got cots? Have you got new mattresses in those cots to meet safer sleep regulations? Have you got pushchairs, slings, toiletries, all the appropriate feeding equipment that you might need? And we've put some resources onto the Sanctuary Foundation that gives you a checklist for different age groups of children for what you might need to consider. And there's also a referral form there. So if there's anything that as a host or as a church you think you're short of, we can supply that for you. And the other thing with that is to think about churches is if you have got a number of hosts that are going to take under fives, can you do one massive referral to Baby Basics rather than 75 individual ones and has delivered them to your church hall? Makes life so much easier for everybody all round. So thinking of some of those really helpful things from both sides. Obviously, not everybody in your church is going to be in a position to host a family, but there are lots of ways that people can be involved. We've talked about already, Rachel said, dropping a cake off, doing a meal rota, all of those kind of things. But one really simple way of your church getting involved would be to donate to our Mother's Day campaign, which is going on at the moment, which is to basically bring in donations so that we have the items to give out to host families, because without donations, we can't do that. So please do go to Sanctuary Foundation and share our Mother's Day campaign, which is all over Krish's social media, my social, Baby Basics social media. It's everywhere. And the other thing to do is kind of look again as a church community, what's the process for getting those children into school? Which GPs do we need to register at? Who's going to need a health visitor? All of those. How do we access a benefit system for those families? Because they're going to have immediate rights to benefits. So all of that needs to be thought through as well. And you can start to be preparing the way for that. And the other thing to really think about is there a local Ukrainian community near to you? that you could link up with, that you could join these families into. We're working quite closely with Bradford Ukraine community at the moment, but we know that there's Ukrainian communities right across the country. So do a little bit of that investigation work. And the other thing that would be really supportive, especially for mums with under fives, is toddler groups, mother and baby groups, and for slightly older children, other uniform groups that these kids could get involved in, that they could feel part of, that they could attend with people that they're perhaps going to be starting school with as well. So just a few practical ideas of how you can start to prepare as a church to welcome those families.
So helpful. Checklist on the Sanctuary Foundation website. This Sunday, Mother's Day, I don't know about you, but lots of the mothers I know say, look, I don't need chocolate or any flowers. So giving something to help a Ukrainian mother set up life in the UK could be a wonderful way of doing it. We are not collecting secondhand goods. That's really complicated when we're dealing with mothers and children under 5. So we've got an Amazon wish list, and we've got a For Common Good wish list if you don't like Amazon. And I think, well, this morning we had about 450 donations onto that already. We only launched it last
1900 now, Krish.
1900? Come on.
Also, just to say, we're not taking secondhand donations for the Mother's Day campaign, but on the Sanctuary Foundation, there is safety information. So if you did want to use secondhand cots or pushchairs, there's a whole process of how you can safety check those. So we're not saying totally no secondhand, but there's just, you need to make sure it's safe, and please don't use secondhand car seats.
Brilliant. We will send you an email with a little video that you could show on Sunday or on the build up to Sunday on your social media. Wouldn't it be great if, as part of our celebration of mothers, we're able to help these very vulnerable women, some of whom I got to meet on the border in Moldova, desperately to stay at home. They want to be with their husbands and brothers and uncles and parents, but have left in order to protect their children. And sadly, it's pretty likely that many of them will be bereaved while they're with us. So they need all the support that we can give them, because this is a really tough moment. So let's get and wrap around these mothers this Mother's Day. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Kat. Wonderful to work with you as normal.